Hello, everyone. Juxtaposition here. I'd like to introduce everyone to our hostess of the show tonight is Jennifer Small. Welcome.
Hello.
Hello. Tonight, you're going to present our first video in the 6-video series of the Chicago Outfit. You being from Illinois are eminently qualified to discuss this topic for many reasons. Tonight's video will be, why don't you present it? Why don't you present it for the audience?
Well, as you would say, this video is entitled Al Capone and the American Imagination, the lasting legacy of Al Capone, Prohibition, and the Roaring Twenties. This is, unlike the future bosses that we'll look at, this is a man who's so entwined in his times. You have three forces of nature almost all augmenting the other. You can't separate one from the other, from the man, the Prohibition, or the 20s. They all come together synergistically to create this larger than life canvas of what was going on in this decade, give or take. They're all three forces that have left a permanent mark on the culture, in the history of mob violence, culture, art, and just the way we think about that context. So just as Al Capone has scars on his face, which I'll talk about, that made a lasting imprint on his life for his entirety of his life, so too these three forces, Capone, Prohibition, the 20s, have left a lasting mark on the culture and society.
Okay, very well. Now, you've selected some music tonight that I don't have the technical expertise to play in the background for us, but we will provide it in a link in the show notes below. And you have selected Bye Bye Blackbird to be the song that embodies this 1920s, roaring 20s period, which is inextricably linked with Al Capone and our imagination and music and culture of the roaring 20s. Could you explain how it was that you selected Bye Bye Blackbird?
Well, Bye Bye Blackbird has that happy-go-lucky spirit, like Bye Bye Blackbird is the blues, like Bye Bye to the Blues. I'm a place where no one understands me, but I'm going where sugar is sweet and so is she. Everything's going to be happy. There's that real happy-go-lucky, extremely optimistic and exuberant spirit that inhabited this time. So it expresses the time, and it's got a real honky-tonk beginning, but even more to the point, it's 100 years old. That song is 100 years old. 100 years ago, March, last month. So 100 years and 1 month old. Now, think about that. It's a song that is still popular 100 years later. That's pretty amazing. And it's become a jazz standard. And just as this song has left an imprint in jazz, so too it fits with this theme of an indelible imprint in the culture, our society. Bye Bye Blackbird has been interpreted by jazz musicians and singers for decades. Just about everyone you can think of, from Joe Cocker to Ringo Starr to Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Ella Fitzgerald, Sarah Vaughan. People do just instrumentals, Miles Davis, Chet Baker, I think his name is. So to me, that just embodies both the happy-go-lucky nature of the time and the fact that what happened in the 20s has stayed with us. It didn't stay in the 20s. What happened in the 20s has stayed with us to this very day.
Okay, very good. Could you explain to our audience how Al Capone, where he came from, under a rock, or did he come from Brooklyn, or did he come from the New York burbs? How did he end up in Chicago?
Al Capone was the fourth of 9 children born in Brooklyn.
Nine children? Let me get that straight. He broke up, so it wasn't clear. 9 children?
9 children, yes.
He's the fourth child?
Yes, he was. And his parents had immigrated from Italy. And let's see, in In the 6th grade, he punched his teacher in the face and was thrown out of school. So he never went back to school after the 6th grade, got involved in gangs and gang activities. And he showed a great talent for gang activity and
In
juvenile.
Brooklyn,
Yeah,
New York.
Brooklyn and New York.
Okay.
And he, the reason Al Capone came to Chicago or found himself into Chicago and became who he became is really due to 2 acts of violence. Without these 2 acts of violence, we wouldn't be talking about him. The first one was when he was a teenager in Brooklyn. He beat up a member of an Irish gang, a rival gang to the Italian gangs. And he didn't kill him, but he really beat him up. And so the head of the Irish gang said, I'm going to get that guy, I'm going to kill him, find me the guy with the scars. So his mentors in criminality in Brooklyn called Chicago and said, you got to take this guy. He's talented, but, he's going to get killed if he stays here. So, take him. They said, okay. They called the Chicago mob outfit at that point. And at this point, he was 19 or almost 20 because he arrives in Chicago at the end of 1919. He'd gotten married at age 19. His wife was a couple of years older. They had a baby boy. She had the baby before they got married. And so, but he stayed married to her his entire life. And so he was kind of a family man, but sort of an adolescent too at the same time. And so he arrived in Chicago, where he was quickly taken under the wing of the second Chicago, no, excuse me, the mob boss that was still there but about to go out. Now, the second act of violence has to do with the first guy in Chicago, the first mob boss, who was known as Diamond Jim, Big Jim Colosimo. And he started the outfit in 1910. And so, but in 1919, the country knew that prohibition was going to take effect in January of 1920. And so people who had money were all stockpiling booze in their house as fast as they could, because you could drink what you still had at the house. You couldn't go out and buy it after prohibition. But organized crime, especially the underboss to Big Jim, said, "Oh, we're going to make a lot of money. We got to go into bootleg." And he said, "No, we're not going to do it. No, I refuse." And as a result, he was whacked. He was killed in his own restaurant, Big Jim. And if he had agreed to go into bootlegging, he would have stayed as boss of Chicago. But as they say, it's not personal, it's just business. He had to be eliminated because he was going to stop in the way of huge profits. So when Al Capone arrived in Chicago, he was now poised for what was going to be a real expansion. And if you think of it in terms of, again, like a Fortune 500 company, they're about to go ballistic with, franchises, if you will, so to speak. So he got there. He was the right man at the right time. Of course, he had to start at the low end, but he worked his way up quite quickly. And one of the ironies is that Prohibition and Al Capone have the same birthday, January 17th.
Oh.
And
1920?
Yeah, he was born in 1899, so he turned 21.
What was the date?
January 17th, 1920 is when Prohibition took effect.
Okay, and it lasted 13 years. 13.
13.
The amazing number of years.
Yes, and Capone turned 21 on that same day.
Oh, so he turned 21 and Prohibition was law.
Yeah, the same day.
His 20th birthday.
It's just one of those interesting coincidences. Interesting coincidence.
Yeah. Now, pause button and go back a little bit. How did Al Capone get his nickname Scarface?
Well, when he was a teenager working in Coney Island, he was working as a bartender, and I think he might have been either 16 or 18. I can't remember now. 18 at the oldest, and he was both a bouncer and a bartender. And by this time, now remember, he's been out of school since the 6th grade, but he's gaining a reputation as a big hunk bouncer type guy. He was 5'10". He looks like he might have been taller, but he was 5'10", heavy set, and he sees this pretty young woman sitting at a table, and he goes over to her and he says, "Hi, honey, you've got a great looking ass," and that's a compliment. Well, she was sitting next to her brother. The brother just gets up with a knife and slices him on the left side of the cheek. Two big scars on the left side and one at the neck area.
Oh boy.
Yeah, that wasn't deep, but it left a permanent scar on his face. Three scars, really. Well, two that were prominent. And for the rest of his life, he hated the nickname of Scarface, and he hated to be seen with the scars. He would never allow himself to be photographed on that side of the face. At one point, he even tried to tell people they were wounds that he had gotten in World War One, but he didn't go to war. He used talcum powder to cover the scars, and I want people to stop and think for a second what that would do to your psyche to know that you've got a permanent scar, two scars on your face that are very disfiguring, especially if you're kind of a vain narcissist, the way he probably was. And you'd want to like overcompensate in a way. So you can sort of understand how the big hat and the scar, all of this draws attention away from the scars. You don't see the scars. So he's
Yeah.
going to be dressing in a way to divert the eye away from the scars. So he's got everything that directs your eye away from the scars on his face. And he hated it. He hated it, but it stuck.
Okay. Well, let's go back to where we were with Prohibition happening on Al Capone's 21st birthday. And then it's 1920. It's January 1920. How does Prohibition and Al Capone and the Chicago outfit, how do they all come together in Chicago?
Yeah,
because he's very young. He's only 21. So
yes.
he's working.
Before Prohibition, the outfit had made their money through gambling and prostitution and racketeering. And the first boss, the one who was shot through the head, or in the back of the head for not
Diamond Jim, yeah.
Diamond Jim, he perfected the art of bribing politicians, juries, policemen, basic law enforcement, juries, and judges. Right. So the money that you get from your activities, you use to pay off the people who would otherwise stop you from doing it.
Yeah.
So
five fingers again.
Yes. So all of these people were more or less like middle managers. They were on the payroll. They're completely on the payroll.
Like a pay-to-play system across law enforcement, the district attorney, the mayor, the governor, and city council members are now getting paid by the mob in Chicago.
Yeah, so if you're going to write it, if you're the CFO, the chief financial officer, and you're writing a budget for your corporation, you have to set aside how much you're going to be of your profits will then be used to bribe the people who will allow you to do what you want to do. And so this is an example of how the mob builds on each other. So that was already well perfected. Now, Prohibition was it was just an act of stupidity, really. It was the 18th Amendment, and eventually it was repealed. I think it may have been the only amendment to have been repealed. But back when it was enacted, nobody had any hope that it would be repealed because there never had been an amendment that had been repealed. So everybody still wanted their alcohol, and the law said you can't sell or manufacture or buy alcohol, but you can drink it if it's in your house. And so let's see what happened. So the second guy, Johnny Torrio, knew that they really had something going here. They just had to make sure that the north side and the south side didn't fight each other. And so Capone and his guys took over the south side. Now, Capone was really not in charge until 1925. It was Johnny the Fox Torrio. Johnny Torrio was a man who was extremely well admired for his intelligence and his organizational skills. He lived well into his 70s, and he was originally from New York too, from Brooklyn too. He'd also made the path to Chicago. But Torrio was not in favor of gratuitous violence. It was more strategic violence. And he just said, let's just make a lot of money. Okay. And so Capone was kind of he was the protege. He was the protege, or Torrio was the mentor. And then Torrio was almost assassinated in an ambush on these right. He was injured, and he also had to spend some time in jail for tax evasion. And after that, he just thought, I've had it. I'm going to retire to Florida. And he turned it over to Al. He said, okay, Al, it's all yours. And, but I think, I guess it's hard to imagine, but imagine a law that absolutely no one respects. And that was prohibition. And so the speakeasies sprouted up, the saloons that were underground or hidden some way. And a lot of these saloons had tunnels, trapdoors and tunnels, underground tunnels in Chicago. So if the police came, you could escape through a tunnel and go somewhere, and maybe they'd just emerge out on the sidewalk and look like you hadn't been doing anything. And I would say, if you think about prohibition, think about everything just going underground, like underground. And but it's also true that sometimes when the police raided these speakeasies, that just added to the excitement. People were having fun.
Yeah, because the cops are going to be getting paid anyway, so
Yeah,
they have a big problem with it. As long as they get their checks or their payola, you know, like because the
yes,
sergeant can fix it because the sergeant probably doles out the money, you know.
yes, yes. And so, well, Capone said, I'm just a businessman giving people what they want.
Okay.
And so during this period of prohibition, he was almost like a Robin Hood figure in Chicago. And he got advice to like dress nicely and look like a businessman. So he wore designer coats, vests, suits, even designer underwear. I mean, everything was expensive. And he had the hat and the scar and, and he had the whole look going. And so prohibition was really a cash cow for the mafia. And this is how, and not just in Chicago, but also in other places, other cities. And especially if you were a port city where you could import and export your alcohol. And actually, the term bootlegger came from the fact that if you wore a high boot, you could hide a bottle of liquor inside your boot. And that's where that term came from.
Very
So,
good.
um, so yeah. So anyway, I think even the presidents, everybody they all had their whiskey in their cabinets. I mean, everybody just found a way to get their alcohol. And I even read that California was the number one producer of wine at this time, and there was some winery that literally shipped their booze to Al Capone on a train that left from Napa. So that's for you, Jeff.
Okay.
They came right from Napa just to Chicago, and right to the speakeasies of Chicago. So also alcohol was also one of the top industries at the time of Prohibition, which would be another reason why the mob would say this is like too good to be true. They're about to say no more alcohol, but it's one of the top in demand industries. Like we can get it now; it's all ours. And it was, I guess, it's relatively easy to make beer. I wouldn't know. I'm just reading about this. They imported whiskey from Canada and rum running from the Caribbean, and alcohol or wine was still allowed for medicine and rabbis and priests, and there's probably ways people found a way to get some booze from those guys. And it just was a cash cow, and eventually Capone's operations added up to $100 million a year. That would include alcohol, but also the others, gambling and prostitution.
In this is between 19, he was in charge like 1925 to 1929, 1930. $100 million is like, it's like a billion. It's like $1 billion of revenue. It's huge. It's a billion. So could you explain a little bit about the geography of Chicago, fairly large area. So we have Cicero is South Chicago, but it's kind of directly south of like Soldier Field, so south, and then you
No,
have west as you head
Cicero,
west.
Cicero is actually west of Chicago. It's 8 miles west.
Well, when I went there, it was south. We just went straight
Okay.
up to get there, and then Rolling Hills Estates
Okay.
was to the west.
Okay.
But Cicero is to the east of where, like Oak Park, where Sam Giancana got killed. He's to the west of Cicero.
Okay.
So there's a whole lot of real estate where Tony Arcardi lived to the west of Cicero, and you work your way, up to Evanston and Winnetka. Yeah, it's to the west and north, I guess.
No.
Right. So why did Al Capone settle down in Cicero way?
Well, he had a family when he first arrived, and so I think it was just a logical thing for him to locate his family in Cicero, and he got a house there, and it became an extended family place, not just for his immediate, but for various relatives who were there from different times, and and then eventually he set up operations there because after 3 years. By 1923, the mayor changed in Chicago, and they went from having a very liberal mayor who was on the take and said you can do all the booze that you want, to a new mayor who said he was going to crack down on on bootlegging. So it was a less hospitable political climate for him by 1923, and so he moved his operations to Cicero,
Yeah.
not just his family, but his operations. And they immediately started taking over the elections through intimidation of voters and, threatening them and so forth. So they got everybody they wanted in the local offices. In fact, they called Al Capone the mayor of Cicero. I mean, he wasn't, but they called him that. And yet so he had his family on one side of Cicero, and then he bought another apartment on the other side of Cicero, which is where he partied with his prostitutes and his cronies. He never gave up prostitutes, even though he stayed married to the same woman throughout his life. And there's a story about how there was a very um, popular jazz musician named Fats Waller at the time, a pianist, jazz pianist, but he
Yeah.
wrote the song "Ain't Misbehaving."
Yeah.
And Al Capone was a big fan of him. And so one day his henchman, Capone's henchman, actually kidnapped Fats Waller. He thought he was going to get killed, and they put him in a truck somewhere, and then they just took him to Al Capone's party house to celebrate Al Capone's birthday, and he performed there and was later paid. But he just could kidnap anybody he wanted and get away with it. And so that's just and but he always kept operations going in Chicago too, and there Chicago was a great port location, as you described, because Lake Michigan, however they couldn't patrol that Lake Michigan, and then that takes you to the other lakes up to Canada, and then you have it was a railroad hub, a big center of railroad, and lots of roads and as airport came along eventually, then great airport hub. So you need all this export import business to
Right.
to provide supplies.
Yeah, because like Oak Park is like directly west of Chicago, and then Cicero is southwest, sort of where Oak Park is. But then my question is, do you want to tell the audience about your grandfather, who happened to be the governor of Illinois during this Al Capone time and before he
Yes,
became the boss?
yes.
Is that a good time to insert that?
My great grandfather, his name was
Okay.
Len Small, and he was governor of Illinois from 1921 to 1929. And the way my family described him, he was practically a saint and even a martyr. And there's a little museum, there's a park named after him in the town, and he's just, and anyone who criticized him was, evil and bad and so forth. But about 6 or 7 months ago, I checked Wikipedia about the governor, and it said that he had pardoned people in the mob. And I thought, well, that's interesting. I never knew that. And then to prepare for this video, I did a little bit more research, and I was quite stunned because he actually had a pardon mill for mobsters. He would give pardons to all these mobsters, but at a price. He charged them a fee, and they got their pardons. And he also pardoned a mobster named Walter Stevens, who was credited with at least 70 murders. And when he was charged with embezzlement, Al Capone's associates helped with the jury tampering, which led to the acquittal. That's not the story I heard growing up, but that's what.
Yeah, you're saying that your great grandfather was charged with embezzlement when he was the treasurer of Illinois.
That's correct.
But then he became the governor, and then that's when they embarrassed him, I guess, with the criminal embezzlement charges.
That's
Was when he
correct.
was in the governor's mansion. And so he then leaned on the Chicago outfit fellow. What's his name? Henry? Is that his name?
Well,
Who's the person you're just talking about there?
Walter Stevens,
He
who
killed
got
60. I think they've
yeah,
said
well,
that's 33. They're making up the number of people that he murdered. And your great grandfather pardoned him,
that's correct.
even though he killed a lot of people. And
Yes.
whether it's 60 or 70, we don't probably know. But your grandfather pardoned him. But that was after he fixed the embezzlement. The jury on that case, I believe, got influenced.
Correct. Well, there were two. Well, Walter Stevens was apparently one of Poe's favorite hitmen. So, and also, I mean, I'm sure that the governor must have known Capone and met him, and as well as Torrio and all these guys. And one, I mean, it is what it is. And so when two of the
He's like a fixer, and he's Al Capone's fixer. But your great grandfather utilized his services on the embezzlement business.
Well, I don't know who specifically. No, I think they were lower level. I mean, there were two Capone quote associates, which is at the bottom of the rung. I mean, the boss is the top, and the associates are the lowest. And so then he got an acquittal, and then these two mobsters were charged with contempt of court because they would not testify or reveal what they had done in the role of jury tampering. It's what you call the omerta code, lips are sealed.
Omerta code.
Omerta code, you don't talk. And so they didn't talk, and they were charged with contempt of court. And then my great grandfather gave them a pardon. So you see how circular it is? I mean, we're going to fix your jury. You get the acquittal. We're going to get charged with contempt, but then you pardon us. And one hand washes the other. And now he did do good things. He was also noted for having been a leader in paving the dirt roads to cement. So he was known as, quote, the hard road governor. And he was a Republican. He was reelected to 2 terms. But they did terrible things, but it's been 100 years, and it's the truth should come out, and the Juxtaposition channel does not believe in concealment; it believes in the truth, and I believe in the truth, and the family is all scattered now. I don't think anyone would care that much, but it just isn't the story I heard growing up. But there it is.
It's an inescapable network where even you say, well, I'm not going to participate, like steroids in sports, like there's athletes that you think don't participate. That's ridiculous. 100% participate. And anyone who goes against that or speaks up in the Omerta code will be blackballed from the sport. No team manager will take on an athlete who isn't doing the same practices. They're not comfortable with people going their own way. They want everyone uniform, following their code of conduct. It's a code of conduct, and you can't do all the racing if you don't take all the products to help you recover and get ready to do the race. They call it being prepared. So if you're unwilling to be prepared, then you're not being a professional person, means you can't be on our team, even if it's an amateur team and there's no money involved. That's the policy of teams that pay no money. And so obviously, if they're going to start paying money out, then there's no question that they're going to follow the America Code and you're going to do the code of conduct, which in this case, with the Chicago outfit, you're talking about payola, pay to play policy across the sheriff's department, the Metropolitan Police, the district attorney's office, the governor's mansion, the assembly people that work in the legislature, and all the important people in the town for socioeconomic purposes have to accept that this is the way we do business in this city or this metro area, which includes Oak Park and Cicero, which is a safe distance from downtown. I don't know how many miles do you think it is from the Navy Pier or Michigan Avenue over to Cicero? Just
it's 8 miles from
about
downtown.
8 miles.
8 miles from downtown.
Okay, 8 miles west, a little south. Okay, got it. Very interesting. There's another question I want to ask you, and let me just check my notes here. Okay. So the next event that's on a holiday is the St. Valentine's Day. Does anything interesting happen in 1929?
Well, yes,
on
I think
Valentine's Day?
I did want to talk about the 1920s a little bit.
Okay, great.
Before we get to St. Valentine's, that's the thing. Well, because that's also part and parcel of all this synergistic excitement that was going on in the 20s, and this is also important to keep in mind that World War I had ended in 1918, and that was considered the war to end all wars. So people thought, no more wars, it's all over, it's nothing but good times from here on. And
right.
It was a time of just loosening up and having fun. And so I could see how it actually probably was more fun to go to a speakeasy and drink champagne and rum or whatever, because it's kind of taboo and that makes it really exciting,
And the flapper dresses for the ladies and the dancing.
Yes, and this was a time of women's lib, frankly. Women got the right to vote in 1920 as well, in May. But before that, women had to wear the long dresses with corsets, and it was very prim and proper. And men and women danced ballroom dancing style.
Right.
And now you had women wearing these just straight silhouette dresses that were short above the knees, and they chopped their hair. Well, they cut it to like little bobs, which made it very easy to take care of. And so men and women could dance the Charleston, which you kick your leg up in the air. I mean, it's not like, the structured ballroom dancing. It's everybody's just moving around and kicking up their legs. And jazz music, imagine hearing jazz for the first time. I mean, you put yourself back in that time. You've never heard jazz before. And then you go to a speakeasy and you hear like a jazz musician or saxophone or xylophone. It must have been so. Plus, you had a lot of black musicians coming from the South, ended up in Chicago looking for a job. And jazz really began, and it's an African-American creation, indigenous to the United States, started in New Orleans and moved up the Mississippi to Kansas City, Chicago, then New York, elsewhere. So just imagine going to a speakeasy, you're going to have a drink and you're hearing jazz for the first time. Just try to imagine that, how exciting that must have been, how revolutionary that must have been. And it's integrated too, which is exciting. People are getting to know each other who were prohibited from meeting each other in the past. There's also something called the Harlem Renaissance then too, which is proliferation of Black art and culture and music and poetry and literature. And excuse me while I have a glass of water. 1 second.
I understand.
Okay. So in the 1920s, you have tremendous materialism, consumption. It was time of tremendous economic prosperity. And maybe, Chuck, can you talk about the economic prosperity in the 20s for a second? Do you know about that? Or?
Not really, no.
Okay.
I mean, it was before the so-called Great Depression, where I've never seen more economic activity in the history of America than when America had no money. So I don't think that the 1920s economics exceeded the Depression. The Depression was greater because, like, while everyone's broke and out of work, they're building the Golden Gate Bridge. They're building the San Francisco Oakland Bay Bridge. They're building Treasure Island Navy Air Base. Then they're building Edwards Air Force Base. Then they're building the Hoover Dam. Then they're building, which it was called the Boulder Dam, later renamed after Herbert Hoover. They're building the Tennessee Valley Authority, which is, I don't know how many dams, dozens of dams in the South. And we have no money, but this is like trillions of dollars worth of public works projects. And you're not fooling juxtaposition here. So in other words, Switzerland, some third party shadow bank, is providing unlimited amounts of money to set America up to be a military industrial economy, which is going to benefit General Motors, Ford Motor Company, who are going to build military vehicles and going to build out the United States Army and Air Force, the Army Air Force, and going to expand Crissy Fields in San Francisco and the Presidio Army Base. And then all we need is the Japanese to attack Pearl Harbor, and we can go to North Africa with George Patton, and we can participate in the unification of Europe. So, but it's just like the gold rush in California, where they spent 9 years building farmland on Swiss property called New Helvetia under Johann Sutter from Basel, Switzerland. He's not an American. He's a Swiss national. And he spends 9 years building a farm and ranching land in Northern California. And when he finishes the rice fields, then he rings the dinner bell and says, "We found gold. Everybody, let's have a gold rush and get 1 million people out here to California." Well, they did the exact same thing with the Great Depression. First, they built out all these companies so that they could produce weapons. And then you have a war when you're ready to go to war. And America was ready to go to war before the Japanese, pseudo surprise sneak attack, which is looking less and less surprising. So anyway, the Roaring 20s, I think, are best known for music, dancing, drinking alcohol surreptitiously in speakeasy clubs. But I think the 30s are known for building dams, military bases, and getting ready to go to war. And I think the economic activity was much stronger in the 30s, whilst everybody thinks
you're depressed, right?
We're in the ditch, right? But that wasn't the case, because it clearly shows that you can be broke and be successful if you have a Swiss banker as your partner. So anyway, proceed ahead with this whole 1920s, Roaring 20s, and then we come up to the 1929, and this would make Al Capone, who was 21 years old now it's 9 years later, so he's about 30 years old now, or he's becoming 30 years old. He's 29 or 30 years old.
A few more things that are important. In the 1920s, you have the rise of the movies. The first talkie.
Oh, yeah, right. Cinema.
Imagine you're now getting your news not just from newspapers, but movies, and also the radio. Something that's became
game changer. Because it used to just be newspapers, right?
Mm-hmm. Now you have radio and you have movies, and the movies glamorized the gangster. Edward G. Robinson supposedly made characters that were based on Al Capone.
Okay.
So now you're not just reading the paper, you can actually hear voices, you can see images. Also, the automobile became more and more popular in the 1920s. And so people could have independence and go off and have little adventures in the automobile. So all these things added tremendous mobility, excitement, even things like the vacuum cleaner and the washing machine and the refrigerator were new, which made it easier for women to take care of the house, much easier. And they could have a break from all that housekeeping with these machines. So things are looking good. It's just all on the up and up. And all that would lead to just, was it Walter Greenspan who talked about irrational exuberance during the 80s when everybody was spending so much? Well, this was a kind of irrational exuberance. But frankly, I've always secretly sort of wanted to go back and visit the 1920s in a time machine. It just seems like a lot of fun. So that's something.
As we got to the end of the 20s, the Roaring 20s, what happened next?
Well, in Chicago, there was a rivalry between the North and the South, the North Side gangs and the South Side.
Okay.
Capone controlled the South. Now, a truce had initially been brokered between the two. There was plenty to go around. They weren't supposed to turf war each other, but that didn't hold. And there became something known as the beer wars. They're invading each other's territories, each wanting more and more of the action. Also, in the 20s, Chicago was getting wealthier and wealthier, and they were building skyscrapers, and there was a lot of legitimate money coming into Chicago. So everybody wants a piece of that too. And so on Valentine's Day, 1929, you have the famous St. Valentine's Day Massacre. Now, Capone was strategically located in Florida that day, and he made sure that he made sure that he invited someone from the local law enforcement to come over and have a cup of tea with him during that day.
Okay, good. So he's got corroborating alibi.
Right. Yeah, he's no dummy. He knows what to do. So now I think almost everyone has heard about the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. It took place at 10:30 in the morning, and it was at a garage. And I always had the feeling that, I don't know, I just thought it was located in a poor, out of the way, scruffy, nondescript neighborhood, just sort of the wasteland part of Chicago. That's not the case. This took place in one of the most desirable and affluent neighborhoods of Chicago then and now. It was in what they call the Lincoln Park neighborhood, which is not only a beautiful park, they have restaurants, great schools, dining, museums, a zoo, and a little bit to the east, you have Lake Michigan with the beach. So that was a blunder. You should not have done it, because people could tolerate the idea of gangs killing each other in a turf war because it's over there and it's all between them. But this shocked everybody's nervous system at so many levels, and I have never seen anyone emphasize the fact that this took place in one of the so-called best family neighborhoods and most desirable neighborhoods in Chicago. And you can imagine that people are going to be furious. And these are people who have power and money who can put pressure on the politicians to do something.
Okay.
But it was a setup. There were 7 members of the rival North gang in the garage. They were told to wait there to expect a shipment of whiskey. And they were playing cards. And one man who was there was just a mechanic with his dog, a dog named Highball. And then the Capone, the alleged Capone guys, nobody has ever pinned it on him directly. There were allegedly 4, some accounts say 4 to 6 shooters. 2 of the men were dressed as policemen, and 2 were just as sort of plainclothesmen. And so they go in and they tell them this is a raid. We're going to raid. Now the guy who's the head of the gang, Bugs Moran, was supposed to be there, and he sees that a cop car is coming, so he doesn't show up. But Bugs Moran was probably the target of the hit that day. But
he bugged out.
Yes, he bugged out. Right. But these were seven, 6 or 7
And
of
what
them.
kind of weapons were used, Jennifer?
Well, at least again, it gets a little sketchy. Unfortunately, you'd think they'd be well known, but there's two
Military weapons?
two Tommy guns, or which
Okay,
were
well, those are
seven.
Thompson's machine guns. Those are
Yes,
military grade.
and they have a cylinder around them, so they could fire the capacity of something like 800 rounds. And so you had four shooters to take out 7 men, and there were
Okay.
something like 70 rounds that were pummeled. The men were told to go next to the brick wall and put their hands on the wall, and they had been told to remove their weapons. They expected it was raised, and they were expected to be frisked, right? Well, if their
Okay.
hands on the wall, instead they were just all gunned out.
Okay.
And and so then the guys left, and the guys who were police pretended, the guys who were shooters pretended like they had their hands up, and the guys who were police pretended to be marching them out with guns, but it was just all an act.
Because they'll
They
take
took,
everybody out so that
right,
like the police are on top of the situation when
right. And so what you have left are
who
six
are
dead men, 6 dead men, and 1 man who hasn't died yet, and a dog that is barking. His poor
eyeball.
owner, Highball's owner is dead, and Highball is barking, and he alerts the neighbors, and they call the police, who arrive,
Okay.
and they take the one dying man to the hospital, and they say, who shot you? Who shot you? And he said, nobody shot me. Nobody shot me. Of course, he's riddled with bullets. Nobody shot me. Nobody shot me. Because this is
Okay.
the American code, right? You don't talk.
American. He doesn't want to endanger, I guess, his family.
Right.
Even though he may die, he probably has wife and children who could be in trouble if he doesn't honor the Emerita code.
Yes. And so in a way, he was dying with honor by his code, the code of
Right. Right.
conduct.
Wow.
So,
That's amazing.
yeah, yeah. And
So then but you're saying there's political fallout after this Valentine's Day massacre because they picked this expensive, nice, family-oriented neighborhood to kill 7 men, and in broad daylight, 10:30 in the morning, in a public parking garage. So what was the? It appears that Al Capone did get himself in hot water, even though they couldn't prove that he ordered it. I think most people believe that he did order that
yes.
murder, right?
Well, yes. Now, this is my analysis that the nice neighborhood contributed to the political outcry. That's not what you'll read anywhere, because
No.
people were shocked and horrified by the execution style, not just in Chicago, but other mob bosses around the country felt this was bringing on too much heat. It was gratuitous violence. It wasn't strategic violence.
Right.
Capone had a reputation of flying into rages and he was known as a monster killer, even though he kind of cultivated this nice Robin Hood, I'm giving people what they want image, but he was a furious man. And right after the massacre, Bugs Moran, the guy who just barely made it out, checked himself into a hospital in Evanston and said he had the flu, and that was his way of escaping more mob violence. He sought safety inside a hospital.
I see.
And he told a reporter, only Capone kills like that. That was his comment. But he was essentially neutralized because those were 7 of his best men. Now, I don't know if the mechanic is included in that. There was a mechanic who liked to sort of hang around these guys, so I don't know if he was actually one of the mafia, but he died. He was there to fix a truck with his dog, and he's dead. So there were when the police came, the photographers came. This was flashed not only nationally but internationally. It was an international sensation, this crime, and the movies have been made about it, and it was just it was a kind of a watershed event in mob history. It bothered people because these were not gangsters shooting it out while they're all trying to rob the store at the same time. This was very calculated, premeditated, and the men that were there were just playing cards, I think, and then they're dead. So, and it was a nice neighborhood. And then at this point, you know, it got the attention of the feds. It got the attention of President Hoover. He said, get me Capone. This is President Hoover would say, get me Capone, get me Capone. And he sent directions to federal authorities, go after this guy, get him. I mean, it was just a strategic blunder. And I think that is the general consensus of historians, that this was just a really bad mistake on Al Capone's part to
I
assume.
mean, he's not well suited to be the boss.
Yeah, this was again, no one was prosecuted or brought to justice for this, and so it's
Okay.
always speculation that Capone did it. So
Wow.
that was the end of
Then, well,
Columbia.
then what they did was they didn't arrest and convict Al Capone for the St. Valentine's massacre, but they went after his brother for tax evasion, his brother Ralph, and then they pursued Al Capone also. They have a real hard time proving it, though. Could you talk about this tax evasion business? And it's another way to get Al Capone
Yes,
off the streets into a prison if you can convict him for tax
yes,
evasion.
yes. He was convicted of. I believe that the charge was he failure to pay $200,000 in federal taxes, and he was sentenced to 11 years in jail. He thought he might get 2 years. He was sentenced to 11 years in jail. And I think, oh, I mean, I think, I think they just had to get rid of him. They came up with something, and they
Yeah,
let
they
him.
fixed it because I heard that his lawyer ratted him out by saying that he made $100,000 a year and that he's willing to pay income taxes on $100,000 for however many years, for multiple years.
Mhm.
And on the basis of the statement of his lawyer, his defense lawyer, he was convicted, which means the lawyer's in on it. His own lawyer helped rat him out. I mean, you're not
Yeah.
supposed to volunteer evidence. The feds didn't have any evidence. They didn't build a case about tax evasion. They just suspected of him based on how many homes he owned, the cars that he drove, his lifestyle and his clothing. Is that they just assumed that but I mean, you could say the same thing about all the Hollywood actors that live in these homes they can't afford. Because
Mhm.
in theory, in Hollywood, they should be issuing 1099s. The studios should issue, what is the monthly rental to rent an $18 million home in Holmby Hills. But like for Eric Schmidt, because Eric Schmidt probably doesn't own his home, and Walt Disney, I don't think owned his home. But let's say it's a $20 million home, so that should rent for $250,000 a month or something. So you just put that on your tax return that you got free rent. But they don't do that in Hollywood. And the IRS doesn't pursue it.
Mhm.
Your car service, the clothes you wear, that is like Kim's out of central casting, and I'm just sort of a work related product. The house is work related. We use it for photo shoots. I sleep here sometimes, but I sleep other places. So Al Capone, that's how they structured his life too, is he didn't have a record that you could audit. Is that he had these nice homes he's living in, but it's like, I don't own them. I don't know what you're talking about, right? I'm a hobo. I'm a homeless person. And that's how
Right.
they kind of foil the IRS, or they foil the Department of Justice, is they go, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just visiting.
Well, his great niece had a story about visiting the house in Cicero,
Okay.
and she said that first of all, she thought he was great. She said Al Capone was a wonderful family man. He bounced her on his knee, taught her to sing and play the mandolin.
Okay.
And he said there was one room in the house that was always locked, and she was with her grandmother, and it was a storage room. And the grandmother said, "Here, let's go to the storage room." And she unlocks it, and all this cheese and sausages hanging from the ceiling. And there's a countertop, and there's a great big wad of $100 bills on the countertop. So that's where he puts some of his money too, with the cheese and the sausages. That
Okay. Cool.
fun
That's a
little,
safe.
yeah, fun little story, I thought. So
Well,
uh,
then, so could you give us a little analysis regarding like how many prisons was he in? And he ended up in Alcatraz, I understand. But
well,
didn't he go to some other prisons too?
yeah, I mean, well, yeah. I mean, he was in Cook County Jail awaiting an appeal, and that
Right.
was
That's
pretty.
county jail in
Yeah,
Chicago,
yeah,
Illinois.
yeah. And then he went to
Pennsylvania,
Atlanta.
East Pennsylvania.
Well, oh, I forgot to say something. After the St. Valentine's Day massacre, that was obviously February, but in May of that year, there was a meeting of mob bosses in Pennsylvania, no, Atlantic City, called the
Oh,
Atlantic Conference,
okay.
because a bunch of mob bosses wanted to get together. It was basically damage control because they felt that this massacre was going to bring the heat on them in their different cities. You know, it's a public relations thing. They don't want to attract.
Yeah, it
And
wasn't, I'm pretty sure Herbert Hoover wasn't the boss of this. It was the other mob bosses who decided what is the best way to get Al out of Chicago. I don't think Herbert Hoover had, I mean, he's part of Stanford University. He doesn't have, no one at Stanford University has the authority to do anything other than be a puppet.
well,
Victor Davis Hanson is the current puppet, and Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel and Victor Davis Hanson and Sam Bankman Fried. Sam Bankman Fried grew up at Stanford. He went to MIT, but he is a scapegoat from Stanford, along with Elizabeth Holmes. That's what Stanford produces. They produce scapegoats. That's what they do. So Herbert Hoover, who is the the namesake of the Hoover Institute at Stanford, he doesn't have the authority to put Al Capone in prison. Al Capone has a higher status than Herbert Hoover did. So, but the five crime families of New York and Miami and New Orleans, they can take care of Al Capone. They could have killed him, and they didn't. They didn't execute him.
well, when he arrived in Philadelphia, and now it gets confusing to me. He spent a short time in a Pennsylvania jail, but
East
after
Pennsylvania, right?
that was for a concealed weapon charge. But
Okay.
after the tax evasion conviction, he was sent first to a federal penitentiary in Atlanta, and then Alcatraz opened, and I don't know, and so this was a way of giving more prestige to Alcatraz by sending
Alcatraz.
diversity.
I think he did it 4 years at Alcatraz.
Right. So he was sent to Alcatraz, and while he was at Alcatraz, he was a member of the Alcatraz jail band because he played the banjo, and so they, he was good enough to play with the band in the
You
jail.
have a dog named Banjo.
Yes, I have a dog named Banjo, and
Capone played the banjo.
yes, and
in the Alcatraz Orchestra.
Yes.
That's
what. So that's why we say, why do we love these guys? I mean, they're so contradictory.
Yeah, they're lovable. Oh yeah,
they're so contradictory. I mean, you got to admit, wouldn't you rather, if you're going to go to a lunch, wouldn't you rather have lunch with Al Capone than some stuffy, like boring?
Yeah, Peter Thiel, Joe Rogan, Alex Jones. Hell yeah, I want to go hang out with the big tuna, Tony Arcardo,
the stores
and Momo. Momo is Sam Giancana's Momo. I mean, they have cooler names and they dress better. They're better dressed.
Well, and they're so surprising. He went up to some jazz musician, I forget the name, and he said, "Can you play this song?" And he said, "No, I don't know it." And so he took $100 bill, he ripped it, and he said, "Here's half. I'll give you the second half when you can play the song." So who acts like that? Who acts like that? And so
I don't know. Larry Ellison doesn't.
Yeah. So
that's because these gangsters are fun at a party.
Yeah, they're colorful people, and
okay.
So and
you want to tell us how it all kind of ended? Because we're at the end of our video.
Okay, that's okay.
The summation of the Al Capone segment of the Chicago outfit.
Well, he had contracted syphilis early on as a young man. He, as I say, never gave up his prostitutes, and that's probably why he only had one child. And the disease had really progressed while he was in Alcatraz. At one point, he just collapsed. And his wife made a plea, please let him out. Mentally, he was gone. Physically, he was gone. And they let him go. And he retired to Florida, and he died at age 40.
Palm Island, let's be real specific. Palm Island, which is a military-created island. All those islands in Biscayne Bay, they're all man-made like Treasure Island is, and they're all built by the military, and including the island where George Bush is on, and where Peter Thiel is on, and where P. Diddy and Gloria Estefan, the island they're on. Those are all military created properties. They belong to the military. And they had the CVs or whatever they're called build them, but they're all built with strategic purposes, and they all have these mansions on them. So Al Capone was retired to a military base called Palm Island. He has an airstrip there. They have an airport there. And that's part of a port facility where Al Capone. It's a nice home. I have a photograph of it, but it didn't download, so I'll try to post that somewhere else. But he was shuffled off to Florida, to Miami Bay or Biscayne Bay for his later years. His child was a son. He had a son.
Yes.
But when his son became a teenager, he couldn't really communicate very well with his father because of the progressive nature of the syphilis, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yes, he was not able to enjoy a nice retirement in Florida. He died from complications to the syphilis, and he was buried in Illinois. And
he was only 48 years old, I believe. 48.
He had just turned 48, yes.
Okay, that's young. His wife was 50 at the time.
Yes. Yes.
And his son, I don't remember the age of his son, but probably like 19, 20, something like that. Or no, let's see, he was only 19 years old when his son was born. So if he was 48, then his son would have been, about 20 years younger. So he'd be at 28 years old. His son was 28 years old when his father passed away in Palm Island, Biscayne Bay. All right, carry on. Any other?
No, but as we go through and look at the future bosses and crime bosses and Chicago bosses, we'll see that a lot of them interacted with Capone at one point or another in their career, and there were some who were there when he was active, but beyond the scope of this video, and I'll talk about them in the future and pick up with them. There's just too much here to get the
right. Johnny Roselli ends up dying in that, floating around in Biscayne Bay. It looks like Al Capone did die in his own bed, whereas Johnny Roselli was in a 55-gallon drum, not that far away from where Al Capone breathed his last breath. Dumbfoundling Bay is not far from where Peter Thiel lives, Gloria Estefan, P. Diddy, and Al Capone, and George Bush, George H.W. Bush, the Bush, Fisher Island, all of these places, when you look at them on a map, you realize that the gangsters, the music artists, the rappers, the drug dealers, the politicians like the Bush family, the military intelligence people, they all live in the same place. And that place is NATO. In other words, those homes are military houses. Gloria Estefan's home, Peter Thiel's home, his gay lover's apartment, his gay wife, they all live on military bases. And they all have gates, they all have security cameras, and they all have ring cameras. So every single person who lives in Miami, Florida, today, Al Capone would have cameras all over his property. Because Peter Thiel, they don't let him do anything unless he's supervised. And that will be true of George W. Bush. He's not going to go anywhere without a leash attached to the collar around his neck. All those people live in a gilded cage, including P. Diddy, who they murdered his father. His father was murdered in Manhattan, New York. And his father was 33 years old, and he was a United States Marine, I believe, who was in the intelligence business. P. Diddy's daddy. P. Diddy's daddy was military intelligence, murdered in New York. So why is anyone surprised that his son would be in the same business? Maybe a different branch of the business. Instead of drugs, it's child trafficking or underground parties, prohibition tunnels in Los Angeles that were built during Prohibition. That's underneath the home for P. Diddy, but they were built by, William Paley, who was there before. He was the first person to live in that house. So if you have a problem with tunnels, you should see who lived in that house when the tunnel was built, because it's not the person you think. The tunnel was already there. Anyway, so thank you very much, Jennifer, because this was kicking off, 6 videos, which is going to examine how business and socioeconomics are handled in the greater Chicago, north, south, east, west, center of the United States of America in a port facility hub. So any final comments, and we'll put this baby in the can. I'll see you.
I just think, Al Capone is dead, but not forgotten. And as we look at future bosses, we'll see that he had an influence on many lives.
Okay, thank you very much, Jennifer.
Thank you.
And I'll see you in the lobby for an adult beverage.
All right.